Krysty. Lovely to meet you both.
Nice to meet you.
Lovely to meet you.
And you guys did something that I have, like, no one's been able to make me do before, and that's enjoy a horror thriller. Edgar, I was absolutely engrossed the whole way through. And even when it got scary, I checked myself in and went, you must see this through. And I'm so glad I did.
Thank you. That's the highest compliment you could pay it.
How did you come up with this concept? Because it is out there.
Well, I think like it's a big part of it is just like both of us having spent too much time in Soho over the years. I've lived in London for 27 years, and I think I've spent more time in Soho than any sofa in any flat that I've ever lived in. And then more recently, I started living nearby, and obviously I worked there in film and TV. And then Krysty also has her own connection as well.
Yeah, I used to live above a strip club in Soho, and I worked at the Irish bar, the Toucan, in Soho as well. So, and my office is now in Soho. So I've spent a lot of time hanging around here.
Krysty, I want to hear your Soho stories. Just take a back seat for a sec.
No, that's okay. You can see why I hired her to be the co-writer.
Well, did those stories come into it, Krysty?
I mean, yes, of course. I joke, like, the kind of like the horrific taxi driver I've definitely had a taxi driver like that. You know, the sleazy guys in the bar with the terrible pickup lines. There was a lot of that when I worked at the Toucan. And yeah, I mean, living above a strip club and seeing kind of firsthand the seedier, much darker aspects of Soho. And then obviously being a bartender, you get to be a bit invisible. You get to listen to people's conversations, and some of the stuff people will talk about in front of a bartender, they should go to jail.
I promise I will move on, but how did you get any sleeping above a strip joint?
Oh, I didn't. I was like 24 at the time. I didn't need sleep. I was always drunk.
What was the song that haunted you the most? What was the most, like, the song they played the most?
Do you know, weirdly, the worst thing after the club would close, which would be about 3 a.m, the strippers, the dancers would stand outside and they would sing show tunes, and they used to sing Oliver all the time, and it used to bum me out so much.
Which Oliver song?
Like Nancy.
Right, okay.
Real sad. Real sad.
Not Food, Glorious Food.
Not Food, Glorious Food. I'd have thrown down a KFC.
Edgar, you've said that this film is a cautionary tale for people who are too nostalgic. What do you mean by that?
Well, I feel like I'm this person. I mean, where there's autobiographical elements in the movie is like, I'm like Eloise in terms of, I was born in 1974, but I have an obsession with the 60s that probably started with my parents' record collection and has continued ever since. But then you start to wonder, when you're sort of spending so much time dreaming about going back, like, what's that really about? Is your sort of like nostalgia for a previous decade a failure to deal with modern life? And I think that might be part of it. So in a way, that's sort of what the movie's about, is that, like, you know, you cannot go back in time. You cannot change what's past. You can only deal with the present and move forward from there. So there's that element to it. And also, I think the danger sometimes is people use the phrase, the good old days, but there is no decade where everything was good and nothing was bad. And obviously it comes up a lot in politics all the time, but it's always a fallacy that there's this perfect decade. And I think with the 60s is like, it was an incredible time culturally, but to sort of to romanticize it to the point where, you know, the darker side kind of gets swept under the carpet is a mistake.
Yeah. Krysty, when Edgar first approached you with this, what did you think?
Well, he told me the story in a dingy basement bar called Trish's. We went on a night out, an exploration of the seedier parts of Soho, because he'd known my history about living around here. And I remember sitting listening to the story and being totally entranced by it. Like holding on to the table in this like little snug corner, being like, and then what happens? And then what happens? And I just thought it's such a powerful, twisted, interesting, weird, thrilling ride, that when he phoned me up 9 months later and asked me if I remembered it, I was like, yeah. And then he's like, do you want to write it with me? And that was such a quick yes. I just thought there's so much in it that's so resonant for people in the modern day, even though a lot of it takes place in the 60s.
The story is incredible, but it can't be pulled off unless you have an amazing cast. And they were all phenomenal, and I thought they were all so appropriately cast. But Edgar, is it true that you first thought of Anya for the role of, not of Sandy, of Eloise.
Yeah, because I first told Anya Taylor-Joy the entire plot of the movie in a similar way to I told it to Krysty in 2015 when I first met Anya in Los Angeles, just after she had her first film out called The Witch at Sundance. I was so blown away by her in that movie, bizarrely playing a character called Thomasin, that like I met her for coffee. I told her the entire plot and she said, "Oh my God, I want to be part of that movie." So I said, "Well, when I've got a script, I'll send it to you." And that was like 3 years later. Now, by this time, I'd seen Anya in a bunch of other movies. I'd seen her kind of like, you know, grow and develop and play lots of different parts. And also just seeing her like even on the red carpet and in like sort of fashion magazines, we started to think, maybe she should play the 60s part. And when we were writing, the Sandy part was kind of expanding. So I was a bit nervous sending her the script because now I was asking her to look at a different role, but she read it and she said, "I would love to play Sandy."
Again, I can't believe I'm saying this about a horror. I now finally have this iconic dance scene that I will always return to time and time again. When I watched that gorgeous scene in Cafe Paris with, it reminded me of that Fiction scene.
Oh,
What
thank
for
you.
you, Krysty, was it like to see that come to life? Because it's one thing to write it, but do you ever sit there and go, how are you actually going to make this come to life?
Oh, every day, every day. Like, you know, the beautiful thing about, you know, writing with a co-writer who's also the director is that sometimes they'll explain to you how they're going to pull some of that stuff off. And you would spend a lot of time trying to explain the mirror tricks to me. And I'd be like, just like unable to take it in. But the dance sequence and that kind of roving camera, I remember talking about that from the very beginning, and like the women switching out. And I actually went to one of the early rehearsals of that. And I recorded it. I sat in the corner and watched it. And it was unbelievable to see it in the flesh and then to see it on camera, because it just takes on a whole new form. I mean, I have no idea how your brilliant brain conceived of it, but he did, and I'm very pleased.
Oh, so much. It was such a joy to watch. Now, you've done this, you've done it really successfully. Tell me you're doing something else together, because as I said, if you can make me watch a horror, I will watch anything that the two of you two do together.
The trick is to put a killer dance scene in there. That hooks you. That's like the carrot before the stick of horror comes.
But have you spoken about possibly doing something together in the future?
Well, yeah, I mean, we love working together so much, and like as you can probably see, just like we wanted to do all our interviews together as an excuse to hang out. So yeah, I would really hope that we would write something else together.
Well, I cannot wait. And again, I'm starting this how I ended it and did this whole interview. I cannot believe I'm going to say thank you for making me enjoy a horror.
Thank you.
Thank you.